It was surreal. A photo op at the church that he rarely attends.
What is going on here? Well, as usual, the truth bears no resemblance whatsoever to what they're telling you. Think about it for just a second. Democratic politicians control the police departments of virtually every big city in this country. Now they're telling you they want to get rid of those police departments. If they did, that would mean less power for themselves. So right away, you know there's lying going on. Democrats do not relinquish power voluntarily, ever, period.
A black man killed with 4 officers holding him down, a knee to the neck, for more than 8 minutes, nearly 3 minutes of which he was no longer conscious for. That's not law and order. That's murder. Stopping and frisking a young black man simply because he's a young black man, that's not law and order. The killing of George Floyd, Eric Garner, the torture of Abner Lima, that's not law and order.
Listen carefully and you will hear them.
The president seems to think that dominating black people, dominating peaceful protesters is law and order.
Take the people who currently have badges, many of whom, by the way, voted for Donald Trump, and swap them out for new people who hate Donald Trump and
people have waited for days for this wannabe wartime president to say something.
That's what's actually happening.
This is what he says,
and it makes sense.
And that is what he does.
Law enforcement is one of the very few institutions remaining in this country that the left does not yet
I've seen people dying in the streets while protesting.
Democrats hate the police because they don't control the police.
I've seen countries ripped apart by hate and misinformation,
Remember 35 years ago when Democrats were constantly attacking the U.S. military?
And racism.
We don't hear that anymore.
Let that happen.
Why is that? It's very simple.
Of course, violence is no answer, but people protesting deserve answers,
which they do,
and they haven't gotten them. No matter how many black men have been murdered, lynched, imprisoned, mistreated,
what Democrats are proposing isn't some form of radical libertarianism.
People protesting in the streets, they know it, and they're tired of it.
No,
and we should be too.
Opposite of that. What they're proposing is a power grab.
At 11 p.m.
Defund the police is a move toward authoritarian social control.
That was the last time there was a curfew like this in the city. And you know
already in the middle of a total breakdown of law and order, as we watch our cities burn, you are seeing new moves to prevent you from defending yourself and your family in the middle of it.
The sad truth remains.
No one would be at this conference unless we were all intrinsically optimistic that problems can be solved.
We got the smartest people in the world in this room. Let's open this to questions, and we'll start right here, sir.
Clearly, the international community is failing refugees.
Parents that have to decide which children they will feed.
You have to clean your doorstep before you tell me to clean mine.
My eyes were peeled back as to what was really going on up there.
But I think that's not where China's going to stop.
Nobody stops Russia.
You have artificial intelligence now.
Threats like climate change.
What are the kinds of reforms that should be taken at this time to really make a difference?
Live from Washington, D.C., Peter Van Praagh and Robin Shepard.
Welcome everybody to HFX 2020.
Well, usually we meet together in person in Halifax, but for obvious reasons this year we're meeting virtually. To get us started, I'd like to introduce Peter van Praagh, President of the Halifax International Security Forum. Hello, Peter.
Robin, good to see you. Thanks very much for doing this. Robin Shepherd, Vice President, Halifax International Security Forum.
Thanks, Peter. Listen, let's get back to basics. What is Halifax International Security Forum?
Well, Robin, thank you for the question. I would think after 12 years of being with Halifax International Security Forum, you might know the answer. But this year, as you said, we're meeting virtually, and we expect to have many new viewers. So I think it is worthwhile to talk a little bit about what we are and what we do. Halifax International Security Forum is, like the United States itself, both an ideal and an entity. It's an ideal because our mission is to enhance strategic cooperation among the world's democracies. Bringing democracies together, when democracies work together, the world is a safer place. And it's an entity in that it is a meeting once a year, every November, in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where we bring together leaders from over 80 democracies from around the world to help chart out policy solutions to the world's toughest challenges.
I love being in Halifax, and it's such a pity we can't be there this year. Peter, what are we going to be talking about over the next few days?
Robin, thanks very much. You know, like I said, what we try to do is we try to take a look back at the year that was and project forward. And we've done a good job so far, although last year nobody predicted the 2020 that we would have. This year, I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. With regard to COVID, numbers are bad now in many, many places around the world, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. We're going to be talking about a new American administration. Joe Biden won the American election earlier this month, and I think that that's going to provide the United States and the world with some more consistent leadership, more predictable. And we're going to be talking about what that's going to mean for the world. We're also going to be taking a look at ourselves. When we started out as a forum for democracies, and this, you know, I should mention, this really stemmed from Senator John McCain's vision, where he called for a concert of democracies. And people would say, well, why do we need that? The democracies are strong. Now, 12 years later, we understand that democracy itself is fragile, that we have to look at ourselves, look at our institutions, and make sure that they serve the people that they aim to represent. So we're going to be talking about that as well, to give people confidence in democratic institutions. And then we are going to be talking about many things, but let me just mention China. In our view, China represents a generational challenge, and we're going to be, democracies together are going to be looking at China, what to do with regard to the China challenge for years to come.
Peter, yeah, and this is, of course, I mean, it's arguable that 2020 has represented something of a paradigm shift in people's understanding of China. Can you expand a little bit more on that, and also what Halifax is doing?
I will do. And this is a good question, Robin, and might be self-serving because I'm now going to mention that indeed you, Robin Shepherd, our own Robin Shepherd, is the author of China versus Democracy, The Greatest Game, which we are releasing to the world this week. It is a handbook for democracies, and it explains really what China is doing to advance its goals and its ambitions around the world. This book is written, you wrote it, not just for governments, but it's written for regular people. It's a primer so that people can really read it, quick read, flip through it, and understand what's going on. So this is really for the general public, and I'm really proud of it. And Robin, thank you for doing it.
It's a pleasure and a privilege, and it is one of the most interesting topics I've ever engaged in. Peter, at the back of the book, we have these HFX China principles. Right. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, these are straightforward principles. These really should not be controversial at all. And essentially what they call for is to just act normally with regard to China. China does a good job of trying to intimidate nation states, private companies. And what we're trying to do, and we're going to be championing these principles around the world, is give people a little bit of confidence that when they work together, when when governments, democratic governments led by the United States, work together to stand up to China, I think we're all going to be safer.
I mean, this remains to be seen, and this, of course, is going to be one of the big discussions, as you said a few moments ago, that we're going to engage in this weekend. Peter, any last words before we move into the next segment?
Robin, thanks very much. I do want to take a moment just to thank a few people, if that's okay. I want to thank our board of directors. I'm very proud of our board of directors, led by Janice Stein, but I also want to mention Amit Tachildiz, Major General Tammy Harris, Ambassador Mark Lippert, Dr. Luis Rubio, and I'd like to give a special shout out to Mrs. Cindy McCain, who's on our board of directors and who is here to ensure that we help to advance Senator John McCain's legacy in bringing democracies together. I also, if it's okay, just take a moment to thank the folks who made it possible to be here. NATO has been incredibly helpful to us. I want to mention our media partners, Politico and Foreign Affairs. I want to mention Club HFX, the private sector, and that's ATCO and Boeing, Chalik Holdings and Oyak. And I have to give a special shout out to the Government of Canada, the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, and the Ministry of National Defence, which leads me to introduce our host for the weekend, Canada's Minister of National Defence, Harjit Sajjan, who our viewers will be hearing from 90 seconds.
Esteemed friends and colleagues, before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Halifax International Security Forum is regularly hosted on the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And because of the pandemic, I'm delivering these remarks from the traditional territory of the Algonquin peoples. To everyone in Halifax, Ottawa, and Washington, D.C., and to all who are joining us virtually from around the world, welcome to HISIF 2020. Bienvenue. I also want to thank Peter von Praagh and everyone at HISIF for their work to organize this year's event under such difficult circumstances. Now, normally, we gather at HISIF to renew our friendships, make new ones, and tackle the critical issues that keep defense and security leaders up at night. Now, this year, because of COVID-19, HISIF is going to be different. But you can still expect the same intimate and compelling discussions. The agenda includes discussions about some of the most critical issues of our time: democracy, human rights, the COVID-19 pandemic, and how the return of great power competition is affecting the world and reshaping our understanding of it. Now, here in Canada, all levels of government are working together to keep Canadians safe. And from a military perspective, the members of the Canadian Armed Forces have been helping Canadians since the very beginning. In February, they helped bring Canadians home from overseas. And by April, our forces were helping frontline healthcare workers protect our most vulnerable Canadians in more than 50 long-term care facilities in Ontario and Quebec. At the same time, The Canadian Rangers were in the remote northern and Indigenous communities providing supplies and logistical support to help keep people safe. Now, this virus knows no borders. It influences everything we do, from running errands to running a country. I do not imagine many of us in the security and defense community spent much time thinking about epidemiology before March. And now, here we all are. Experts in defense and security and international relations, climate change issues and economics, forced to see our work through the lens of a global pandemic. Now, despite the pandemic, though, the world continues to deal with other defense and security issues, some long-standing and some emerging. For all of us, our challenge remains how to understand a rapidly evolving security environment so that we can anticipate emerging threats and adapt. We know that state and non-state actors are engaged in below-threshold conflict against democratic nations. They attempt to use incremental action and disguised intent to antagonize while avoiding a meaningful response. They attempt to gain advantage across multiple domains by trying to erode our unity and exhausting our resolve. And throughout this pandemic, we have seen them seek ways of turning the crisis to their advantage. They've spread disinformation that could cause people to question the effectiveness of key global institutions, the rules-based international order, and even democracy itself. But we know that the best way forward is for countries that share the same values to work together, fostering dialogue and cooperation based on mutual respect between nations. And Canada favors a multilateral approach to problem solving. Across a range of issues, we have demonstrated a strong record of effectively convening nations, of bringing them together to discuss difficult challenges and achieving positive results. Now, that includes addressing defense and security challenges facing the international community. In particular, throughout the pandemic, we have seen allies and partners striking a necessary balance between critical needs at home and helping each other with supplies and expertise. For me, this really brought home, once again, the critical importance of multilateralism. Canada's position as a stable middle power means we can do more to safeguard and reinforce our partnerships that have defined global cooperation for the last 70 years. We know that these partnerships are vital to global stability and prosperity. It is why, 3 years ago, Canada launched a new defense policy, Strong, Secure, and Engaged, a 20-year roadmap to ensure our military can meet the challenges of the evolving security environment. Now, because being engaged in the world means that Canada must invest in our capabilities and increase our contributions. Though Canada has participated in every NATO mission since the alliance was founded in 1949, a track record for which we are very proud of, under the previous government, Canada's defense expenditure was around 1% of our GDP. Now, that is where we started when I first gave my speech here at HISF in 2015. With our defense policy, we are increasing our defense investments by 70%. This will ensure that our women and men in uniform have what they need to do the important work we ask of them. And with NORAD modernization, we will do even more. All around the world, Canadian Armed Forces members are doing critical work, supporting our allies and partners and upholding the rights and freedoms of the most vulnerable, often at great personal risk. It takes a particular kind of courage to put the safety of others before your own. And we will never forget Sub-Lieutenant Abigail Cobra, Sub-Lieutenant Matthew Pike, Master Corporal Matthew Cousins, Captain Maxime Miron Marin, Captain Kevin Hagan, Captain Brendan Ian MacDonald. 6 Canadian Armed Forces members who lost their lives in a helicopter crash in the Ionian Sea this year, and Captain Jennifer Casey and Corporal James Choi, who died in tragic accidents here at home. I appreciated the condolences sent by our partners and allies. Despite these tragic events and the global pandemic, Canada remains engaged in operations around the world. Last year, Canada deployed an air task force to peace support operations in Mali. We are currently in our second year of tactical airlift support to United Nations mission in Africa from the United Nations Regional Service Center in Uganda. And in Europe, we have more than 800 personnel deployed on Operation Reassurance, Canada's contribution to security and deterrence measures in Central and Eastern Europe. This includes 540 Canadian Armed Forces members as part of NATO's Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group, which we lead in Latvia. And as I speak, we have 6 CF-18 fighter jets and about 135 personnel in Romania as we participate in the enhanced air policing mission there. And in the face of unprovoked Russian aggression, Canada continues to stand with Ukraine. Members of the Canadian Armed Forces are there as part of Operation Unifier, working with Ukrainian security and defense forces to build their capabilities and capacity. Meanwhile, in the Asia-Pacific, in the face of aggressive actions by North Korea, Canada had about 240 Canadian crew members of HMCS Winnipeg and a Cyclone maritime helicopter recently deployed on Operation Neon. There, they monitored attempts to evade UN Security Council sanctions on North Korea, and it was assisted by a CP-140 Aurora Maritime Patrol Detachment based out of Japan. Now, our personnel are working with our international partners to identify and share information on suspected evasion activities, like ship-to-ship fuel transfers. And in the Middle East, we have commanded NATO Mission Iraq for 2 years to support Iraq in building more effective defense and security institutions. Canada's contributions to the global coalition against Daesh have been essential in countering Daesh and fostering security stability in the Middle East. Despite the challenges of the pandemic, we continue to work closely with our coalition partners to solidify our gains in the region. In Latin America and the Caribbean, Canada delivered thousands of kilograms of aid from the United Nations to help with pandemic relief earlier this year. And we continue advancing the women, peace, and security agenda everywhere we can, so we can improve operational effectiveness, practice what we preach, and ensure our armed forces are more representative of the societies they defend. But the only way to lead and ensure the safety and prosperity of our people and the world is to continue investing in defense. These investments benefit our regional and national economies, creating well-paying jobs. As I have said before, defense and security companies here in Halifax and right across Canada can be confident that we will continue with the investments that we laid out in Strong, Secure, and Engage, so that they can continue on with their work designing equipment, investing in R&D, and hiring hard-working Canadians. COVID-19 changes none of those plans because investing in defense will be critical to Canada's post-COVID economic recovery. Canada's defense sector employs 283,000 people in stable, high-paying jobs and generates 15.2 billion Canadian dollars in GDP. Defense investments can yield important innovations that are not only good for our militaries, but for the whole world as well. Like the Canadian Defense Innovation that is contributing to the global COVID-19 response. In August, our scientists developed a coronavirus risk calculator. This online tool calculates the probabilities that one or more people in a given group are infected with COVID-19, but not showing symptoms. It takes into account group size, location, and timing, as well as the risk-reducing effects of testing and isolation. Now, we've shared this tool with federal, provincial, and territorial health officials and with the World Health Organization. Canada is also playing a key role in vaccine research, and several Canadian companies now have vaccines in clinical trials. We have announced $173 million through the Strategic Innovation Fund for Medicago, based in Quebec City, securing up to 76 million doses of their COVID-19 vaccine candidate. And we are investing up to $18.2 million in precision nanosystems from my hometown in Vancouver to help advance the development of a vaccine candidate through pre-clinical studies and clinical trials. What's more, the National Research Council of Canada Industrial Research Assistance Program is providing about $23 million to advance 6 COVID-19 vaccine candidates in various stages of clinical trials. One Canadian company in particular, Acutis Therapeutics, also located in Vancouver, designed a critical piece of nanotechnology in the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine that has shown promise in recent reports. Now that is good news, not just for Canadians, but for the world. And we can certainly use more of good news these days. As we think of the many challenges before us, let's use this year's HISIF to reinforce the importance of international cooperation. Let us reaffirm the value of the rules-based international order. Let us reassert how critical multilateralism remains. And with that, I look forward to hearing how we can confront the challenges of our time. I wish you all a great forum. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Good morning, Minister. Welcome to the Halifax Forum 2020. This has been an absolutely extraordinary year since we met in Halifax last year at this time. Who would have thought that we would have had the year we've had? Tell me, Minister, what do you see as the biggest challenges to defense and security in the wake of the pandemic that is still ongoing?
Well, when you look at 2020, I think all Canadians and probably citizens of the world would love to see this year kind of be over. But for us in defense, it actually started very early, even before the pandemic, some of the challenges that we had to face when it came to, for example, in Iraq with the missiles that were launched from Iran, the downing of the Ukrainian airliner where we had so many Canadians, storms where we had to respond to for domestic operations, and obviously then a pandemic. And during this time, we had to make sure that we fulfilled all our international obligations, making sure that our force was ready to respond. And we did. And it's wonderful to see that our allies were also thinking in the same way. But as we look at the challenges that we face, some of the traditional challenges don't go away. Our concern was during this time is that other adversaries taking advantage of the situation. For example, the gains that we made in Iraq, we need to make sure that the fight against ISIS continued, while at the same time no other nations try to take advantage of any of the situation. And as we talked about in the last forum, we have to start looking at the causes of conflict. The indisparity between wealth in countries causes grievances, which then certain groups will try to take advantage of that lead to conflict. So obviously this, from our discussions before, things have become even more complex, but we cannot forget that the early root cause of conflict has not changed. The pandemic and some of the challenges that we've seen around the world has only just made it more challenging. And so we need to be working even more closely together inside our own countries from a whole of government perspective, not just defense, but also as close allies, as democratic nations and multilateral organizations come together to deal with these type of threats.
You know, we've had a change, obviously, in the United States. There will be a new administration. Do you see new opportunities, Minister, for working with like-minded governments to promote security and peace? Is this something that you see on the agenda for 2021?
I think we have to look at every challenge that we face and see the opportunities that come with it, because otherwise it can become daunting. Let's put it that way. some of the opportunities, I think what we've, through this challenge of the pandemic, has also shown us on how important it is to making sure that we have appropriate supply chains inside our own countries, but at the same time, supportive of one another. So these are some of the things that I think we just learned from the pandemic. To answer your question directly, when it comes to the new U.S. administration, I was at the Halifax Security Forum a number of years ago when we had a previous administration, and for us, it does not change. Our relationship with the U.S. has been built by our soldiers on the battlefield, who have fought shoulder to shoulder. And it doesn't matter which Canadian government or which U.S. administration, we have a tremendous relationship with the U.S. that is built by our soldiers on the battlefield together. But at the same time, we are we're not just neighbors. That trade relationship that we have is a significant one, and that's something that we need to take a look at. How do we move forward? How do we look at addressing the security challenges together? The Canada-U.S. relationship is probably the most closest relationship that we have in the world. We come to each other's aid when it's necessary, and we back each other up and work together and convene other nations to be able to deal with security challenges. So we look forward to working with the new U.S. administration.
I've heard you talk, Minister, when you've spoken in Canada and when you've spoken abroad about the importance of collaboration with fellow democracies. That has been a theme in many of your speeches. Do you see coming, hopefully, out on the other side of the pandemic in this next year, or at least certainly better, do you see new opportunities to work together with democratic countries around the world?
Absolutely. I think I wouldn't say new opportunities, but the pandemic has reminded us of the relationships that we've always had. So, for example, we have obviously our traditional relationships, the work that we do in our multilateral organizations, Canada, U.S., Five Eyes, NATO, the coalition. But right close to us, we have the Caribbean nations that we already collaborate on. For example, right now we have a ship in the Caribbean doing drug interdiction work on Operation Carib, something that we've been doing year after year. We also have our relationship with South America, a really tremendous relationship. But we need to make sure that we look at those opportunities and develop those further, because those nations are also challenged. Challenges from climate change that they have, challenges from other nations trying to take advantage of certain influence. ASEAN nations is another example in the Indo-Pacific. So through this time, we have, I think, looking at how can we further develop our relationship. And one thing that we're doing in Canada, we're looking at those relationships from a whole of government perspective. So, for example, Minister of Foreign Affairs, myself, International Trade, and the Minister of International Development. Where are those relationships that we need to further things on? And I'm looking forward to having greater conversations, either virtually and hopefully at the light at the end of the tunnel, face-to-face once the vaccine rollout occurs.
Minister, I know you talk constantly to your counterparts around the world, privately as well as in public sessions. What would you say is top of their minds right now as they think ahead 6 months to a year?
Mm-hmm. I think top of mind right now, and we've, from a defense minister, our counterparts, we stay in touch quite regularly, sharing information. How do we make sure that each one of us share our experiences so that we can better prepare our support to our nations, and each nation is going to be different. I think this pandemic has reminded us of how we need to be able to work together even further.
You talked just a few days ago about the challenges of the pandemic and the role of the Canadian Forces, even in logistics, in thinking forward about a vaccine rollout and other challenges that the pandemic will bring to this country over these next 6 months. That's a role that Canadians don't often see the forces play in that direct way. Do you see the forces becoming, in fact, a more visible and important part of domestic life in Canada as the pandemic creates new challenges over this next year?
Well, I think for Canada, the military has been involved with supporting where we can in the pandemic. We put 24,000 troops on a standby notice to be able to deal with the pandemic when we fully didn't know where we were going, but we needed to be ready. We also need to be ready for the floods and fires, domestic situation at the same time. And I'm very proud of the work that our troops have done in the long-term care facilities, doing the PPE, logistics planning. And when it comes to the vaccine rollout, the military will always be there to provide that necessary support. And we're already doing a lot of work now, but we're going to let the experts be able to get that work done. And then as we move forward, look at where the military can play their best role, because this is not about just the military coming to provide that support. And this is not only just a whole of government effort. This is actually a Canada-wide effort working with the provinces to get this done. And every other nations are also looking at the same challenges of how we're going to be able to get through this. I just had a conversation with Secretary Wallace actually just this morning, talking about how we need to further our discussions on supply chains, also looking at some of the security threats that we still face and how we're going to be able to work through that as we move forward.
You know, as a Canadian, if I can say to you, Minister, the expertise that the forces bring in logistics is unparalleled. And I know that many have turned to some of the outstanding members of the forces who have provided advice, skill, and are there to answer the many questions that people who are dealing with logistical challenges they've never faced before. So that skill is really appreciated by many Canadians across the country who are facing these challenges. We have time for maybe one more question that I would like to squeeze in, if I can, before we let you go. You know, I noticed you wrote the foreword to a report about the challenges that Canada, like many, many other countries, faces from foreign interference in domestic politics, in elections. This has been a big theme over these last several years. How do you think about those new challenges? Do we need new kinds of capabilities to deal with them? How important are they on your agenda going forward?
These are some of the challenges that we looked at many years ago, and why the legislative changes that we made, giving more authorities to our security agencies, bringing in cyber defense into CSE, which is under my responsibility to provide that confidence and a proper system in place to making sure that our institutions are protected. One of the things that now we can see that democracies are challenged by adversaries when it comes to cyber capability. And one thing I'm very proud of is the work that we started some time ago. Now our agencies actually have the appropriate authorities that meet the capabilities that we actually have. But it also takes the further investments, so our cyber center that has been started. But when you put all this together and we talk about how important our democracies come together, especially in this forum, it takes effort to protect those democracies. Our citizens expect us to make sure that when they're exercising democracies, things are going to be protected. When we're conducting business, that their IP is going to be protected, while at the same time, when they go about their daily business, that their privacy is also going to be protected. And I'm really proud of the work that the Communication Security Establishment under Shelley Bruce and what she's been able to do let's put it this way, gives confidence to Canadians that we have some extraordinary Canadians in those positions looking after their security. And I always tell the people who work at CSE, Canadians will never know the work that you do, but they're going to feel the impact of how safe that they feel. But I'm here to tell you on their behalf how proud we are of them.
Thank you very much, Minister, first of all, for making time in what is honestly a crazy schedule, making time to come and spend time with us at the Halifax Security Forum. And thank you personally for your support of the forum. We're all very grateful for it. And we look forward to meeting in person, certainly by next year at this time.
Great, Janice, and thank you for your leadership as always.
Bye-bye now.